Hello friends, I am glad to see you again. Today I will tell you about a homeowners association that thought it could use my house. I swung my dusty pickup onto the winding mountain road a full 48 hours earlier than anyone expected me. My red-eye flight had landed at dawn, the connecting bus hadn't broken down for once, and the dog sitter texted that Jasper was perfectly happy for an early reunion. All I wanted was a hot shower at the cabin before collapsing with my beagle on the deck. Instead, every curve of the climb filled my windshield with warning signs that something was off. The remote gate hanging open, tire ruts in the soft shoulder that weren't mine, and, when I rounded the last bend, 3 unfamiliar SUVs hemming in my tiny gravel drive like bloated ticks. Nothing rattles a person quite like realizing strangers have invaded the one spot on Earth you thought was reliably your own. This cabin isn't a ski resort rental or a cute timeshare. It's the place I bought, cash thanks to a scrappy inheritance, precisely because the solitude lets me breathe. There's one little homeowners association that maintains the private road, plows in winter, and otherwise claims to protect community standards. I'd had run-ins with them before, mostly over solar panels they called an unsightly glare hazard. The president, Darla, always spoke as if every deed in the valley required her handwritten blessing. I'd sent Darla an email 2 weeks ago letting her know I'd be overseas on a volunteer build trip, just in case a tree fell during one of our infamous thunderstorms. She'd replied with her usual syrup-slick politeness and a passive-aggressive PS that security patrols would keep an extra eye on the place. At the time, I'd rolled mine and ignored it. Cut back to now. My front porch lights were blazing at noon. Smoke drifted from the chimney, despite it being late spring, and music, some tinny pop station, pulsed through the logs like a heartbeat. I parked at the edge of the drive, snapped a few photos of the strange license plates for my records, and quietly approached my own door. Voices echoed inside, laughter, a kettle whistled. I could smell bacon. That was the last straw. Bacon is a sacred rite in my kitchen. I didn't barge in old Western style. I unlocked the door with my key, swung it wide, and stepped straight into the sort of scene you only expect to find in a sitcom dream sequence. Darla stood at my butcher block island wearing my novelty Eat Local apron, spatula in hand. Around the hand-hewn table sat 3 other board members, Vince the treasurer, Harmony the secretary, and their resident muscle, Colton, with plates already loaded. They froze like guilty teenagers at a busted party. Darla recovered first, flashing the smile that had bulldozed a dozen budget votes. "You're back early," she trilled, as though I'd simply interrupted coffee. Then, in the same breath, her eyes narrowed. "You didn't inform the board of a schedule change. That's a security concern." I stared, lost for a second in the absurdity. "This is my house," I said. "What are you doing in it?" Colton leaned back, boots on my cedar bench. "Road association emergency," he grunted. "Big storm last week. Rock slide near the switchback. We needed somewhere to coordinate." He gestured toward a laptop perched beside my bread box. "That doesn't explain why you're cooking brunch in my kitchen." I felt the adrenaline prickling but kept my voice level. "Pack your gear. You have 3 minutes to leave before I call the sheriff for trespassing." Harmony, usually the diplomat, piped up with a chirpy lilt. "We slipped a notice under your door. In emergencies, the bylaws allow right of entry for community protection." "No, they don't," I shot back. Section 8 says you can access common areas, not privately owned dwellings, and only after attempted contact with the owner. I held up my phone. "International roaming is still a thing. You never tried." Darla's smile wilted. "Obviously we did, or we wouldn't be here." Then, as if a light bulb flicked on, she thunked the spatula on the counter. "Frankly, I'm concerned about your behavior. You're acting hostile. Maybe you're not who you claim to be." She dug in her purse and produced her cell. "I'm calling 911 for a welfare check." I almost laughed. Instead, I stepped onto the porch to avoid whatever fumes of entitlement were clouding the air inside. Through the open door, I heard Darla's syrupy voice relay that there was an agitated male refusing to leave the association's temporary operations center. She described the address as communal property. I couldn't help snorting at that. Mountaintop response times hover around 15 minutes on a good day, long enough for tension to stew. I used the window to photograph them rummaging around, Colton quietly stuffing beer cans into a grocery sack like a raccoon startled at dawn. My security cameras, 2 discrete units installed after last year's attempted shed break-ins, were no doubt recording every movement too. I texted the live feed to myself. creating off-site backups in case something mysteriously disappeared later. Behind me, Darla stepped outside, still on the phone, and raised her voice. "Yes, officer. He's here right now." Looking threatening, she eyed my truck. "Blue pickup, plates unknown. Oh, and he appeared drunk." She glanced back at me, eyebrows arched triumphantly. "Nice try," I told her quietly. "I drove 5 hours on 2 cups of airport coffee. My blood's probably 90% caffeine and regret." Her tone shifted gears into sweet concern as she thanked the dispatcher and hung up. "For your own good, you should wait down by the gate," she suggested, painting herself as the reasonable adult. "You're agitated and we wouldn't want misunderstandings." "Not leaving my property," I said, leaning against a porch post. "But I'll sit right here where the body cam can see me when the deputy arrives." Inside, the guilty brunch brigade resumed muttering. Harmony poked window blinds, probably checking whether I'd called reinforcements of my own. I just kept documenting. The one thing years of small claim scuffles have taught me is that daylight and paperwork win wars. I texted my attorney friend Paige a quick heads up. "HOA broke in, police en route, please stand by for fun." Time stretches in these moments, yanking adrenaline like taffy. I had half a mind to call the sheriff myself, but decided letting Darla own her false report was more poetic. Every heartbeat hammered out the same steady mantra. "They are in my house, they are in my house, they are in my house." 5 minutes passed, maybe 10, before Vince shuffled onto the deck carrying a plate heaped with bacon and eggs. He extended it like a peace treaty. "We really didn't mean harm," he murmured. "Just figured an empty cabin was better than paying for rooms in town." I stared at the plate. "Vince, that's my farm share bacon, $40 a slab, put it back." He looked hurt, and retreated inside, muttering that I'd always been antisocial. The irony tickled me. Nothing screams social like hosting your own uninvited buffet. A distant engine growled up the gravel. Darla straightened her blouse, arranging her features into practiced distress. "Deputy's here," she whispered to Harmony, loud enough for me to catch. "Everyone stick to the story." Blue lights flickered beyond the pines, and a county SUV rolled to a stop beside my truck. Deputy Morales, tall, calm, no nonsense, stepped out, one hand on his belt. He recognized me. We'd shared coffee at the volunteer fire breakfast last year. Darla marched forward, playing executive host. "Officer, thank goodness. This man broke into private property and refuses to leave." Morales lifted an eyebrow, glanced at me, then at my front door key still hanging from the knob. "Afternoon. Sir, can I see some ID?" "Of course." I handed over my driver's license and cabin deed copy I kept in my glove box precisely for HOA nonsense. Morales examined the documents, then addressed Darla. "Ma'am, property tax records list him as the owner." Darla didn't flinch. "That's outdated. The association has issued a temporary assignment for community use due to emergency infrastructure management. He must vacate." Morales looked at her with a mixture of confusion and fatigue I suspect every rural deputy carries when dealing with HOA theatrics. "Ma'am, there's no such statute in the county codes," I interjected. "Deputy, my security cameras show them entering with a spare key that was hidden in my locked meter box. I didn't authorize that. I want them removed and, if you think appropriate, charged with trespassing and burglary." Burglary sounded severe, but Texas Penal Code, I'll leave the exact state vague, defines it as entering a habitation without consent and committing or intending to commit theft. My bacon counted. Morales asked to see the footage. I pulled up the time-stamped clip of Darla fishing the key from the meter box, which required unscrewing a sealed panel. He watched silently, jaw tightening. Inside, the cabin had gone quiet. Through the window, I glimpsed Harmony hurriedly zipping a suitcase while Vince unplugged the laptop. Morales radioed dispatch for backup. The mountains echoed faintly with the return squawk. "Ma'am," he called to Darla, "I'm going to need everyone inside to step out, one at a time." She paled but complied, herding her crew like sheep. Colton swaggered out first, trying to act casual. Morales patted him down, collected IDs, repeated the process with each board member. Their names matched my prior HOA rosters. No wandering strangers after all. While he ran checks, I finally stepped across my own threshold. Plates still steamed, laptop open to a spreadsheet titled Q2 Special Assessment Proposal. A quick glance showed projected revenue from short-term rental of member cabins during owner absences. My stomach nodded. "Deputy," I called, "you'll want to see this." Morales examined the document, whistled softly. "Looks like intent to profit off unauthorized entry." Darla tried one last gambit, raising her voice to lawyer mode. "Those are internal drafts. Not actionable. She folded her arms like a child refusing broccoli. Morales wasn't impressed. Internal or not, the burglary statute doesn't require profit, just intent. And you did remove food items. He gestured to the half-empty bacon wrapper. That constitutes property. The second patrol SUV arrived and things accelerated. Statements taken, photographs logged. The 4 board members read their rights. As handcuffs clicked, Darla twisted toward me, eyes blazing. "You're ruining the community spirit." "Community spirit doesn't involve invading someone's home," I said softly. "Enjoy the ride." Morales quietly advised me how to file a restraining order, suggested I board up the meter box, and promised a full report for the district attorney. When the SUVs disappeared down the mountain, the forest settled into a hush so profound I could hear my heartbeat again. I finally sat at my own table, Jasper's leash draped over one wrist, and stared at the cold eggs left behind. The dog sitter would arrive soon. Blissfully unaware of the morning circus, I texted Paige another summary. 4 board members arrested, lawsuit incoming. Her reply came fast. Gather receipts. They're toast. Outside, the breeze carried birdsong, but beneath it, a fresh, simmering resolve set in. They'd violated my space, thinking no one would catch them. Now the real reckoning would begin. The county jail released the 4 arrestees late that night on a recognizance bond, and by sunrise, the rumor mill was grinding like a cranky wood chipper. I woke to 8 voicemail messages pinging in sequence. First, a frantic one from Darla. "We need to talk about dropping charges for the sake of harmony." Then 2 huffy rants from Vince accusing me of dragging good citizens through the mud. And finally, a trio of half-apologetic, half-threatening texts from an HOA group thread I barely remembered joining. I muted it all and brewed coffee thick enough to float a nail. Paige called as the kettle clicked off. "I've already drafted the complaint," she said, never one for chit-chat. "Civil trespass, conversion, burglary, violation of implied covenant of quiet enjoyment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress for seasoning." I pictured her grin through the phone. "We'll file Monday." That fast? Speed matters. If you let them set the narrative, they'll paint you as the crank who hates neighborliness. "I want our version stamped and numbered before their PR machine kicks in." She paused. "You sure you're up for depositions? They'll dig for dirt." "Let them. Closest skeleton I have is an overdue library book." Paige laughed and hung up to wrangle paperwork. I leashed Jasper for a hike to clear my head. The slide the board had blamed for their emergency operations center turned out to be 2 ankle-high boulders resting politely on the roadside. I rolled them aside in 10 minutes. On the way back, I spotted fresh spray paint along my front gate post. Violation noted. Must remove unapproved exterior color. Someone was already retaliating, and they were as subtle as a marching band. Mid-afternoon brought the next twist. A certified envelope thumped onto my welcome mat. Notice of immediate assessment, road repair levy. According to the letter, every owner owed $3,200 payable in 10 days to cover storm damage coordination costs and temporary command post logistics. They'd even attached line items for the bacon, eggs, and diesel to haul the SUVs. Darla's signature graced the bottom in loopy, self-important cursive. I scanned and emailed the notice to Paige, captioning it, "Add retaliation to the list." An hour later, the doorbell rang. My nearest neighbor, Marigold, a retired science teacher who raised show chickens, stood clutching her own assessment letter. "You too?" she asked, voice shaking more with outrage than age. She'd heard what happened and wanted the real story. I served lemonade on the deck and laid it out. Marigold's jaw set like curing resin. "They never had authority for any of this. We need an emergency meeting." By sunset, 5 more neighbors joined us. 2 young brothers who ran a landscaping crew, a novelist with a penchant for being left alone, and a quiet couple whose cabin doubled as a seasonal bakery. Every one of them had received the same assessment. Colton had personally posted some on doors while owners were out. The novelist Vaughn produced a trail cam photo of Colton striding across his porch with a staple gun. We hashed a plan. Petition for a special election to recall the board, invoke the state's ombudsperson for HOA abuse, and freeze dues in escrow until an independent audit could sort the finances. The brothers offered to handle the petition drive. They knew every driveway by heart. Marigold volunteered her chicken coop, freshly disinfected, as a neutral ballot collection site. I promised to set up a secure website explaining events, complete with my security cam footage and legal citations. Transparency, we agreed, was the best disinfectant. The following morning, I drove into town for printer paper and found a shiny SUV tailing me the whole way. At the market, the driver idled behind my truck, engine rumbling like a territorial bear. Colton. He rolled down his window. Word of advice, he called, casual as spitting sunflower seeds. Best keep your mouth shut about board business. Accidents happen on these roads. Then he flashed a grin too small for his jaw and peeled away. I filed a harassment report with Deputy Morales on the spot. He took it seriously. Colton's bail conditions included no intimidation of witnesses. Morales promised to forward everything to the district attorney. Document every contact, he reminded me. Bad actors trip themselves faster than law enforcement ever could. Back at the cabin, the landscaping brothers, Ezra and Boyd, had set up a folding table and were already collecting signatures. Half the valley seemed lined up, some signing the petition, others dropping off baked goods and moral support. Not one person defended the board. Apparently, stories of Darla borrowing cabins had surfaced before. She'd just never been caught red-handed. That evening, my web hosting provider flagged unusual traffic. Over 5,000 hits to the site Paige and I launched only 6 hours earlier. Someone had posted the link to a national property rights forum, and the comments poured in. Outrage, advice, offers of drone footage to monitor further trespass. It felt like watching a wildfire. Only this time, the flames were on the right side. Day 3 brought certified letters of a different flavor. The board, through a boutique law firm downtown, issued cease and desist orders demanding I remove defamatory content and cease interference with HOA governance. They gave me 48 hours. Paige cackled when she read them. They clearly hired the priciest bulldog in the phone book. Too bad truth is an absolute defense. We responded with a polite promise to preserve all evidence for discovery. Meanwhile, the petition drive exceeded quorum by lunchtime. We submitted it per the bylaws, forcing a recall vote within 30 days. Darla tried stalling by claiming the petition lacked proper formatting. Paige fired back with statutory references proving otherwise. The county ombudsperson, copied on every email, opened a formal investigation into board misconduct. Momentum snowballed. Then came the fire inspection. 2 uniformed county officials arrived, clipboards in hand, claiming an anonymous complaint alleged my chimney was sending sparks across property lines. They found nothing amiss but left a form stating I'd passed with no violations observed. I framed that certificate and hung it beside the front door like a souvenir from the war. The board's next gambit was more underhanded. Overnight, someone blocked the only paved curve leading to my cabin with a fallen log and a hand-painted detour sign pointing through a muddy utility track. I discovered it at dawn and suspected sabotage, but rather than call the deputy again, I grabbed my chainsaw, cleared the log, and left the pieces stacked neatly as free firewood beside the road. I also set up a trail cam aimed at the curve. 2 nights later, it captured Harmony dropping off another log. That footage went straight to Morales, who added vandalism charges to her growing rap sheet. A week before the recall vote, the arrested board members attempted a last-ditch charm offensive. Glossy flyers slid under doors inviting everyone to a community barbecue and listening session at the Recreation Pavilion. The invite promised smoked brisket, live music, and an opportunity to move forward in unity. Most neighbors saw it for the sham it was, but curiosity and free brisket drew a crowd. I attended, camera on. Darla took the makeshift stage, microphone trembling just enough to pass for humility. She apologized for any misunderstandings, blamed confusion on outdated wording in the emergency bylaws, and announced the board would drop the contested assessments if owners agreed to table the recall. She never mentioned the criminal charges still pending. When questions opened, Vaughn the novelist asked whether outdated wording also instructed board members to temporarily list absentee cabins on short-term rental websites under fake host profiles. Gasps rippled. Darla stammered something about pilot revenue programs. Vaughn pulled out printed screenshots. Darla's profile had listed at least 7 cabins, none hers. Each listing touted rustic charm and exclusive community access. Guest reviews under pseudonyms raved about free bacon and scenic hikes. Deputy Morales, who'd unobtrusively mingled near the drink cooler, stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said to Darla, "were you aware those listings constitute commercial use of residential property without permits? That's an additional misdemeanor." He read her rights for the second time in 2 weeks. The pavilion fell silent except for the sputtering grill. Vince tried to slip away but found Ezra and Boyd, both broad-shouldered and unimpressed, blocking the exit. Harmony wept into a plate of coleslaw. Colton clenched his fists until Morales' partner suggested he relax unless he wanted new cuffs. The impromptu arrest parade ended the barbecue early, leaving brisket unclaimed and the listening session decidedly one-sided. 3 days later, the recall vote tallied at Marigold's coop, 82% in favor of removing the entire slate. The bylaws required at least 67%, so the decision was final. Within an hour, we appointed an interim committee. Marigold as president, Vaughn secretary, Ezra treasurer. Their first act was to suspend all late fees pending a forensic audit. Second act, hire an independent locksmith to rekey every common area lock the former board had access to, including the spare keys they duplicated without consent. The district attorney announced felony burglary charges against Darla and Colton, misdemeanors against Vince and Harmony, plus civil penalties for violating the state's Deceptive Trade Practices Act. The DA's press conference featured a side table stacked with evidence, printed rental listings, catering receipts charged to the HOA account, and my bacon wrapper sealed in a plastic bag like an exhibit from a foodie crime lab. Reporters loved that detail. Bacongate, they dubbed it. With the legal gears turning, I expected life to quiet down, but there was one more curveball. 3 weeks post-recall, as summer storms rolled in, I received a letter from Darla's attorney attempting to settle out of court. They offered reimbursement for property damage. They valued the cabin usage at a laughable $700, plus a written apology if I'd sign a non-disparagement clause. I mailed back a single sentence: "See you at trial." Paige prepared for deposition season like a kid gearing up for state fair. We compiled logs, security footage, affidavit from the dog sitter who found muddy footprints in my bedroom, and financial statements showing Darla had funneled over $25,000 of rental income through a shell account titled Mountain Hospitality Fund. The bank subpoena tracked every dime: payments for spa visits, designer handbags, and a suspicious retainer to the very boutique law firm that kept sending me threatening letters. When Darla finally faced questioning, her polished composure cracked. Paige asked, "How much profit did you anticipate from leasing properties you did not own?" Darla replied, "We weren't profiting. We were recouping community expenses." Paige slid a photo across the table. Darla poolside at an out-of-state resort, fruity drink in hand. The timestamp matched a weekend my cabin had been booked to a bachelor party. Darla's lawyer called a recess and never quite recovered momentum. Settlement talks resumed more urgently after that. This time they offered full restitution, attorney fees, punitive damages, and a clause banning Darla from future HOA leadership anywhere in the state. We countered with higher punitive damages and demanded they publicly admit wrongdoing in writing to every homeowner. 2 days before trial, they caved. The final check exceeded the cost of my cabin's original purchase. I earmarked part of it to fund a proper community emergency fund, run by the new board, overseen by an independent accountant. Colton pled out to lesser charges in exchange for community service repairing the very road he'd clogged with logs. Under Marigold's supervision, he spent weekends grading drainage ditches and repainting faded guardrail posts. Vince and Harmony, fined and shamed, quietly sold their cabins and moved away. Darla, facing a felony record and bankruptcy, attempted to sue her own attorney for malpractice. The last I heard, she was renting a small apartment in a distant city, her charisma no longer opening doors. As for the valley, it thrummed with a different energy. Summer cookouts returned, this time truly open to everyone. Jasper made friends with Marigold's show chickens, though we kept him leashed for their sake. The brothers landscaped each roadside turnout with wildflowers, and Vaughn hosted monthly reading nights on his porch. Folks still disagreed about paint colors, noise after dark, why somebody's generator coughed at 2 a.m. But we hashed it out face to face, remembering how fast a little power can warp good intentions. One crisp autumn morning, Deputy Morales dropped by to return one last piece of evidence: the meter box key Darla had swiped. He handed it over with a half smile. "You want this back?" I shook my head. "Keep it. Good luck, Charm." He tucked it in his vest pocket. Glad it ended right. I watched his cruiser wind down the mountain, sun glinting off the badge, and breathed deep. The cabin smelled of cedar again. Not trespass. I poured a mug of coffee, stepped onto the deck, Jasper at my heels, and raised the cup to the tree line where quiet had finally reclaimed its rightful place. 7 quiet months rolled by after the settlement. Months so ordinary they felt like borrowed sunshine. The valley roads stayed clear. The gate swung only for friends, and the most exciting headline on our neighborhood website was "Lost Hike Sock Found Near Creek. Claim if yours." But complacency never lasts where people taste power and want it back. While the new board balanced budgets and planted wildflower berms, Paige and I spent evenings stacking bankers' boxes for the criminal side of the saga. Darla and Colton had pleaded not guilty, forcing the county to drag us all into a walnut-paneled courtroom the following spring. You'd think a felony burglary trial over stolen cabin time and bacon would be a footnote in legal journals. But reporters kept showing up, sniffing for another viral twist. I took the stand on day 2, right hand raised, the oath tasting metallic on my tongue. The prosecutor asked about the key in the meter box, the spreadsheets, the bachelor party rental that funded Darla's poolside daiquiri. When she held up the vacuum-sealed bacon wrapper, half the gallery leaned forward like it was the smoking gun in a spy film. Darla's lawyer objected on grounds of snack prejudice, whatever that means. The judge overruled with a weary sigh. Across the aisle, Darla sat stiff as a store mannequin, pearl earrings bobbing each time she swallowed. Colton slouched beside her in an off-the-rack suit that fought to cage his shoulders, eyes flicking from jurors to the exit as though measuring sprint times. Paige's cross-examination of Darla 2 days later played like a teaching reel for law schools. She started mild. "Did you believe you had permission to enter my client's home?" Darla nodded frantically, explaining the bylaws again. Paige produced the amended bylaws, the ones we'd filed after the recall, and asked Darla to read aloud the no trespass clause the community had voted to insert. Darla's voice cracked on the word owner, and a juror in the front row actually winced. Then Paige cued the courtroom monitors and rolled security footage of Darla prying open the meter box with a flathead screwdriver. Freeze frame. Zoom. Paige let the silent image hang like a billboard for 2 beats before murmuring, "Does that look consensual to you?" The jury needed barely 3 hours. Darla and Colton were both nailed for felony burglary. She picked up misdemeanor fraud, he a harassment charge. Vince and Harmony, having flipped early, escaped jail with stiff fines and public service shifts. A month later, under bruised spring clouds, the judge handed down sentences. Darla got 18 months in state custody, suspended into 5 years probation, and 500 hours at the county animal shelter. Poetic justice for someone allergic to my beagle, Jasper. Colton collected 6 months in county, 2 years probation, and a restraining order that keeps him a full mile from every cabin in our valley. Cameras flashed as they left. Darla tried to hide behind her lawyer's briefcase, but the shutters kept clicking. Within 90 days, their cabins went to auction for restitution. Marigold rallied volunteers to clean both places so the bank inspectors wouldn't faint. We found monogrammed Mountain Hospitality towels, a clipboard pricing luxury packages, and a dusty carton of yard signs shouting, "Vote Darla, protect our values." The towels went to charity, the signs to the dumpster, and the clipboard to Deputy Morales. By midsummer, 2 wildlife biologists bought Darla's cabin and hung owl boxes along the ridge. A poet snagged Colton's and promised stargazing nights for anyone who brought pie. The valley finally exhaled. My settlement check felt like monopoly money, so I split it. Half became a Loctite emergency reserve for the HOA, guarded by dual signatures and quarterly audits. The other half launched the Ridge Rights Scholarship, $5,000 annually for rural homeowners fighting predatory HOAs. Paige, my attorney friend, volunteers pro bono guidance, and Jasper's wagging tail greets visitors on the website. Peace held until a convoy of white trucks labeled Pinnacle Vistas Development barreled through the gate. Their slick spokesman, Mr. Gable, pitched an eco-luxury resort, 40 hillside villas, a spa, and, his words, integration with existing cabin stock for overflow. Translation: buy absentee owners cheap, bully holdouts, and reboot Darla's rental scam with corporate muscle. We pushed back fast. Marigold demanded geology surveys, Vaughn mined zoning archives, Ezra and Boyd photographed rare trillium that would vanish under cul-de-sacs. Our counterattack: conservation easements, watershed data, wildlife corridor maps, a petition to label the ridge a critical scenic viewshed, filled my dining table. At the public hearing, Pinnacle flaunted glossy foam boards of infinity pools. I unrolled a dawn panorama of the ridge, then overlaid their own rendering. Villas sprouting like sores. Vaughn cited university letters warning mass grading would wipe 10 years of climate research. Commissioner Ortiz asked Pinnacle's engineer about avalanche mitigation. He admitted no study existed. The commission voted unanimously to deny the zoning change. By sunrise, the white truck convoy was gone. Our story caught state lawmakers' attention. Page insisted I testify for a bill tightening limits on HOA entry rights and upping penalties for fraud. Public speaking terrifies me, but the scholarship inbox was crammed with homeowners begging for change, so I went. At the Capitol, I opened with 30 seconds on the break-in, pivoted to stats on rogue HOAs statewide, and closed on the scholarship's early wins. A bipartisan 8-1 committee vote sent the bill forward. 2 months later, the governor signed it, handing me a ceremonial pen for the mantle. It rides in a jar of screwdriver bits, proof an ordinary person can budge a statute. Back home, summer painted the ridge neon green. The new board passed sane solar rules. The reserve fund hit its first milestone, and the scholarship aided a rancher battling lawn color mandates, a widow whose HOA outlawed bird feeders, a jazz pianist ticketed for practicing during quiet hours, and a nurse fined over a rainbow welcome mat. On July 4th, we gathered for Vaughn's Star and Pie Party. Fireworks reflected off cabin windows as children chased glow sticks, and Jasper herded laughter like sheep. Paige stood beside me, cider in hand. "Funny how the worst nonsense can fertilize good ground," she said. I nodded. Misery is a clumsy matchmaker, but it makes neighbors out of strangers. Another firework blossomed white across the sky, illuminating every face that now shared one hard-won belief. Home is sacred and we'll guard it together. Friends, thank you. See you soon.